then I'll ask you to please mute and wait till that noise has passed. So this week's Parsha is Vayishlach, very long Parsha, by the way, and has a lot of content in this Parsha. Now, Chazal tell us that Yaakov's meeting with Esav, his preparation for his meeting with Esav, because that's Vayishlach means he sent. He sent Yaakov, if you remember the story from last week, after all those years with Lavan, Yaakov is finally on his way back home to the land he never really wanted to leave and always wanted to be in. But he's aware that his entry into the land might bring him into contact with his brother. And he's not sure. He's not sure what Esau's attitude, even many years have passed. He's not sure how his brother will actually receive him. So he goes through a couple of phases. At the first phase in the Parsha is that Yaakov prepares a gift. He prepares messengers to go ahead and to inform Esav, if they can, that Yaakov is coming to see his master, very humble, subservient way, talking to Esav. He has gifts for Esav, very elaborate gifts. And then at night, he starts feeling that maybe he didn't do enough, and he does something else. But this Parsha, the opening segments of this Parsha, tells us how Yaakov went to meet somebody who might have been his enemy. And so our sages in the Medrash tell us that during the Roman occupation of Israel, that when Jewish leaders had to speak to Roman leadership, that they would study this Parsha, that they would go over it and to see what they could learn from Yaakov before they go ahead and speak to what was for sure an adversary at that time. And according to tradition, Rome is actually a descendant of Esav. So very, very apropos to be studying this episode. So let's take a look. Just out of curiosity, could you I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in a moment. How many of you have the text of the Chumash in front of you, available? Put your hand like close to your face, because I see your faces, those of you who allow me to see. Okay, so I know many, at least many of you do. I'll try to compensate for those who don't have. But so so when the Torah discusses the gift that Yaakov is going to send to his brother, the Torah in Pasuk Yud Daled, so it's chapter 32, Pasuk Yud Daled, says as follows: Vayalen Sham Balayla Hahu, that Yaakov went to sleep that night. And then Vayikach min hababi yado minchal Esav achiv, that he started to gather. He literally, the Torah says, he took or he gathered from that which had come into his hand. That's the literal Vayikach min hababi yado. He gathered that which had from that which had come into his hand. A mincha. Now we know mincha as davening. It's a davening that parallels a korban. I mean, there's a korban with the same name of a mincha offering, So we know in the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash, we know the word mincha is also a type of offering, and this was an offering to Esav, not recognizing him chas v'sholem as a deity, but recognizing him as somebody who's important, and Yaakov wants to make sure he makes that acknowledgement. So this expression, though, of vayikach min hababi yado, that he took from that which had come into his hand, invites a lot of input from commentators. And the key commentator, we almost always start with Rashi in a thorough study of text. Rashi brings down not one, not two, but actually three different explanations of this phrase. So first, Rashi says, Vayikach biyado, he took from that which was in his hand, basically a one-word answer, though Rashi brings other proofs, another verse to show that the context is correct. Birshuto, it was in his ownership. That's number one. Number two, brings down from the Medrash, which says, it takes a very literal understanding of taking something that's in your hand. What kind of nice gift could you hold in your hand and pass along to somebody? Directly or through messengers? What comes to your mind? Okay, yeah, I see why you could all give signals like that. One Cheryl's signal. Jewels. That's what the Medrash said. Right. That I saw the ring. I saw the pointing to the ring. I know what you were saying. That the Medrash takes a very literal explanation that it was stuff that Yaakov could pull out of his pocket, put it into his messenger's hands. The messengers could put it into Esav's hand. Very portable wealth, and maybe used for other things as well. So that's the second explanation. And then Rashi brings down a third explanation, is that it meant things that were really Yaakov's, because just like Yaakov spoke earlier when he left and he had his dream and he promised Hashem that he would give Maisa, he would tithe his possessions, that he had already done so. And once he tithed his possessions, what was left was really his, because he paid his debt, to Hashem, and however that money would be used appropriately. So now that was really his. So those are nice explanations, and I believe that we'll come back to them a little bit more specifically in a moment. But what's the big question, though? What would you ask on Rashi after hearing these explanations? And maybe don't.
How come he went to sleep and you never?
What's that?
Then he did this. He went to sleep and then he did this. It's like in the same line.
Right.
So, is he doing this in his sleep?
But probably, one second. Good question. But that's not a question on Rashi. That's going to a question on the context of the story. I was thinking I read it, and I wanted to skip over it. But maybe we'll come back to it. And I'll look at the pasuk just while. So I think probably what it really means is that he made camp. He set up camp, but he himself wasn't going to sleep. He set up camp. That would be camp for the night. But the next thing that he did was to start preparing this gift to be sent to Esav. But the expression of how he took that gift, where it came from, that it came, from his hand. Rashi has three explanations for. The question that we have to ask ourselves is why? Why does Rashi have to bring three explanations? Because if he brings three explanations, what would you say is pretty obvious?
That Yaakov owes a debt to Esav. Maybe this is his restitution for stealing the bracha.
Well, wait. Hold that thought, Sarah.
If he brings three explanations, he's not so sure either, maybe.
Right. I'd say that I want to look at it as a generic thing. There are many times in Rashi's explanation on Chumash where he brings two answers. There are sometimes when he brings three and sometimes even four explanations. But the general rule, like Charna said, is the general rule is that if Rashi brings more than one explanation, it means that each one has a weakness. So he's not totally satisfied with, either, or in the case of ours, since it's three, with any explanations. They each have their own weakness. And the Sittei Chachamim, which is a primary commentary on Rashi, I've mentioned over the years a couple of times that once in class or in a letter that I wrote to Nachama Levi was asking a question about the methodology of Rashi, and Nachama Leibowitz told me that she had the same question. The question actually was, if I remember accurately, is when in our Chumash brings down what we call in the Hebrew the Divrei Hamatchil, the words that it quotes from the verse that Rashi is going to comment on. So my question was, is Rashi really only commenting on those words, or could his explanation actually include some additional words that might come after, but for space reasons or whatever, just were not put in? So Nechama Leibowitz told me that she actually searched, and at that time she said she searched 243 commentaries on Rashi for that answer, and I think didn't find it. So there are a lot of commentaries on the commentary, but the Sittei Chachamim is one of the pillars of commentary on Rashi, and he explains the weaknesses as follows. Number one is, for Rashi to tell us that the expression that he took from what's his hand means that it was under his ownership, that's superfluous. What are we going to think? We're going to think that Yaakov stole something in order to give it to Esav? I mean, that's ridiculous. So that's the weakness in that viewpoint, that you're stating the obvious. So therefore, Rashi brought the answer about the jewels, that it was literal, what he could hold in his hand. It was giving us, a hint at least of what it was that he was sending. But the Sittei Chachamim says that, but why not be more specific? It's very specific about the different animals, so maybe you should have said bracelets and nose rings and earrings, etc. So the Sittei Chachamim finds that a weakness, and then on the explanation that it's emphasizing that this was really Yaakov's possession because he had already separated a tithe that would be dedicated to other lofty purposes. So the Sittei Chachamim says also, why do you have to say? Why do you still have to that phrase? It doesn't really explain that phrase, because the non-sacred, by default would have been his. So he finds weaknesses in all three. I was reflecting on this. Yes.
Rabbi, is there any indication of the weight of each of his explanations by the order in which they're given? In other words, is the first one a better solution?
think not. Let me tell you, I've never seen. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen it specified. And I guess we'd like to think that unless Rashi in some case would have a specific agenda, I guess it would be logical to think that the first one might be the most weighty and most obvious, and Rashi would try to present the one that has the least problems with it. And even though maybe my question was pretty strong, would we expect otherwise? But I don't know. It's good to hopefully maybe explore with it. I got to jot that down. But I did want to share with you just a little while ago. I really was thinking. So what's the message in these three answers from Rashi? And I'm going to share the following, and I invite you to add any thoughts that you may have about this as well. So Rashi's first explanation is Birshuto, he owned this. And why? And the Siddur Chachamim says that's sort of obvious. Why state it? And maybe what it's telling us is really Yaakov's commitment to honesty. Now we know that Yaakov had his bout with something that at the best bordered on dishonesty, misrepresentation, and and maybe it's kind to say just bordered, because he does leave his father with the impression that he is Esav. So he allowed at least allowed his father to think that he was somebody else. And Yaakov, and it's not as if Yaakov went in unprepared, and it was just a false identity, and the mistake was totally Yaakov's, Yitzchak's. Yaakov came in with food that his father had asked Esav to bring him, at least per the instructions that matched the instructions that were given to Esav, and he came in wearing Esav's clothing. So it wasn't a total, just honest mistake on Yitzchak's part. I mean, that could happen. And and I'm not saying that Yaakov should not even have corrected it, but the halacha deals with that question in a general sense. Like if you if you come by, if you go to somebody you got somebody's mail by mistake, and it happened to us actually earlier this week. You get somebody's mail by mistake, and you decide to, you know really who it should go to. Maybe there's even in our case there was a mistake, and it was addressed to us, but with somebody else's name. So I actually tried to figure out, where the error might be and track down the real owner, and I did. But let's say it's a case that on the day that you get this mistaken envelope, that somebody just moved into your building, and the envelope matches that address, and you bring it down, and the person opens the door and says, "Whoa, how nice it is for a new neighbor to come down and say hello to me on my day that I moved here, to think of how much it would mean to me to have a neighbor come and welcome me into the building." But that wasn't your intention. You just wanted to give the envelope back, or you wanted to do maybe the mitzvah Hashavas Aveda, and they created a story that you had nothing to do with that at all. So you're not really obligated to have to set them straight. It's not an earth-shattering thing. You don't have to tell them, "Listen, I wanted you to know, I didn't come to say hello. I just have this envelope for you." I mean, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to hurt their feeling that way? But that's something that the other person manufactured, that misunderstanding. You didn't have anything to do with that. But Yaakov did play a role in creating a misunderstanding. And, certainly there are many attempts to justify what Yaakov did, and it's a whole topic of discussion in and of itself, which I've had in the past here in the shul, and probably have it again. But yes, there were prophecies, and we know that Yaakov was the better candidate, etc., etc. But it still doesn't mean that everything that Yaakov did was right. And I think Yaakov, let's say, I think he learned a lesson. Now we call Yaakov, we say Kiten emet Yaakov. We associate the value of emes, of truth, with Yaakov. And I think Yaakov went through a process of tshuva, that he became a baal tshuva in this regard, that he understood how he may have pained his father, even pained his brother, how he wasn't totally honest, and become extra committed to a measure of honesty. So perhaps, Rashi's first message to us is, I know it should be obvious that Yaakov's only going to give things that are on his own, but the Torah is emphasizing where Yaakov's coming from. And whatever he had from Lavan's house was very honestly earned. it wasn't as much as he should have gotten from Lavan because he was swindled by Lavan, but whatever he had was definitely honestly his. So that's the message of Rashi's first explanation. When it comes to the stones, it's actually interesting is that the Ramban, when he comments on the same phrase, the Ramban indicates that protocol would have called for not only animal gifts, but maybe to send over golden vases and silver pitchers and silver candy dishes, that things that were made of valuable materials. But what's different between those materials and valuable stones, gems? What's the difference between a golden Kiddush cup and a 1 ounce bar of gold or a nice gold ring?
You've made it into something beautiful.
Okay, that's true. Anything else?
I hope everything will go better.
I can't hear you. Could you say that? I'm not sure who was speaking because the voice wasn't loud enough for me to recognize it. No? Okay.
Maybe it's something that's useful as opposed to not useful. Something has value, but the other.
Yeah, that's true. That's true also. Now, maybe I'm biased, but and I'm basing it with some knowledge of what takes place later in the discussion between Yaakov and Esav. But I'm going to say that Esav liked things that were more ostentatious. And had Yaakov had those golden and silver vessels, maybe he would have sent them, and maybe he just doesn't have them. And or maybe Yaakov was sending a message that Yaakov has the ability, and all people should, that Yaakov has the ability to recognize that something can be valuable even if it's not visible to other people. So these gems that you can keep in your pocket, they can come in very useful in different ways, but it is something that's not as flashy as the other gifts that Yaakov was sending to Esav. So that reflects part of Yaakov's character. Yeah. Somebody want to say something? And the third explanation of Rashi, that it was talking about what Yaakov had specifically after tithing his wealth, so that he now had real full ownership of everything that he considered to be his, and the other items were either segregated, or most likely at least some of them segregated, maybe some of them had been already used for holy purposes. But I think that's showing us that in contradistinction, or maybe in conjunction with Rashi's first explanation, is that Yaakov was careful about his honesty now, not just between himself and others, ben adam l'chavero, on the interpersonal level, but he also was meticulous in any obligations he had to God in that regard. So these three messages are messages for us today, coming from Rashi's three different opinions of this phrase that he took from that which was in his hand.
For myself.
The Chafetz Chaim,
Everyone here. Because there's so much.
if you're talking but you're not talking to me, please mute. The Chafetz Chaim has, I think, a rather novel idea. When Yaakov has that dream, as the night that he leaves Canaan, starting his trip or his flight, and I don't mean flight by airplane, obviously, but his flight away from Esav. What does he use as a pillow? I could read your lips.
A rock, a stone.
So to be more specific, he himself actually gathered multiple stones, right? But when he woke up, and the stones were around him, like they were protected, not just like maybe place his head on, but also to have some kind of barrier around him. But when he woke up, there was only one stone. At least that's what we can read the pasuk. Certainly, we have opinions that read the pasuk that way. That it was only one stone, and the Medrash says that all the stones were fighting to have the schus, the privilege of being the one that the righteous Jacob would lay his head on for the night, that they should lay his head on him. And they all were fighting for that privilege, and God blessed them with the ability to combine so they could all have a peace in this special occurrence. And the Chafetz Chaim says that that made an impression on Yaakov. And he realized, my goodness, if stones, which are inanimate, can have some level of feeling, so what's going to be now if I go ahead and I start picking specific animals to give to my brother? Because the Chafetz Chaim, I think the Chafetz Chaim, at least the way it's recorded, doesn't explain specifically what I'm about to say, but it appears to the Chafetz Chaim that the expression of taking what's in your hand it implies convenience. It's easy. Oh, let me just grab something, and I'm going to somebody's house and I forgot to buy something. What do I have around? I have a package of sweets, or just something I can grab quickly. So that's what the Chafetz Chaim is saying. That this sounds like that Yaakov was a little bit flippant about it. Didn't give so much attention to what was taking place. Just what can I gather quickly? I'm going to send to Esau. And he said, you wouldn't want to do that. Here he's trying to make an impression on Esau and to calm him down and to nullify any type of anger that he might have. The Chafetz Chaim says he would want to do it. He would want to pick the choices of the animals to give to Esau. So what's going on here? So the Chafetz Chaim says that Yaakov made a kal b'chomer. He said, if stones could have feelings about being involved in some type of mitzvah, so animals would have that also. And so he didn't want to offend the animals. And so whatever animals approached Yaakov, so those he took. We had animals that approached Noah. That was by divine command. This might not have been by divine command. But it does show us, the Chafetz Chaim doesn't specify it in the next stage. He leaves it as Yaakov's sensitivity to animals, which many people appreciate. But even when we appreciate our sensitivity and obligations to proper treatment of animals, but we always have to keep in perspective that the human being is the greatest physical creation in the world. And if we're going to be sensitive to animals, then how much more so we have to be sensitive to the feelings of human beings as well. So another message, courtesy of the Chafetz Chaim. What was that, Cherna?
Janice, yeah. Hi.
Oh, Janice, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple things, if I may, now or later, about the Evan that I heard this week. First of all, I think you implied also that the stones around were for protection. He put the stones around his head more as protection from animals and so on. And my rabbi was saying, you want a comfortable pillow, you don't sleep on a stone. But he said that Yaakov had many issues with stones, and I can't cite them all now, I don't have my notes. And the stone representing the two words together, Av and Ben, and that typified Yaakov, that he, exemplified his relationship with his father. He was comparing it to Lavan, who totally ignores his father, Betuel, and so on. But it was that strong relationship. So Evan had another meaning, according to one interpretation, the connection between Av and Ben and the whole generational issue there. So
very nice.
As opposed to Lavan, almost like, you could say Lev, but low Ben maybe, but so on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to share with you also something from Rav Soloveitchik on this expression, because about this episode, as the part that we've been discussing, and as it continues, because Rav Soloveitchik really brought it into the contemporary world. He said that Rav Soloveitchik noted that, obviously we see a difference in what might be important to Yaakov in this world and what's important to Esav in this world. Yaakov understood that Esav likes huge amounts of physical possessions. And Rav Soloveitchik said that as long as Esav was either welcoming or demanding, as the case may change through the course of history, if they're only asking for physical items, so the Jews would give it. So if the Jews had to buy protection for the members of their city, or if they had to raise money to redeem captives, as hard as it was and as poor as their communities might have been, they would sacrifice what they had and try, if needed, to gather more in order to be able to protect themselves, their lives, and their values and our beliefs, Torah and mitzvahs. And there's no end to that. When it comes to the fact that, paying the honor and sacrificing some of the physical comforts in order to protect ourselves spiritually, that's what Yaakov was doing with Esav, and that's what Yaakov's children, descendants, we have done throughout history. But if it comes to the point where this Esav, or whoever this enemy is asking us to give up our special sense of holy observance, to give up family life, to give up Shabbos, to give up kashrus, which also became questions connected to the Hanukkah episode of trying to prevent Jewish observance. That when it comes to that we change our character, that this Yaakov, who was the Ish Tam, this wholesome person who spent time, studying, contemplating God, that he becomes more of a warrior. He has to wrestle with the angel, and he has to confront Esav in still a more militant and defiant way, because it's not potentially just the physical. It is the spiritual. Just like Esav wanted to accompany Yaakov, he wanted to make some kind of bond there that could allow Esav to influence Yaakov, and Yaakov wanted nothing of it. And this view of Rav Soloveitchik on how to understand this episode actually guided him in his decisions in two very different realms, which had some commonality. I'm going to try to choose my words, very carefully. But when it came to ecumenical discussions, with the church, if you want to talk about, world hunger, how to bring peace to the world, so those are great things, and we can talk with one another. You want to start debating which religion is, truer, or what our bonds are, and should we be more united? That when it comes to the spiritual realm, that we don't engage in those conversations. And in a different light, that was also Rabbi Soloveitchik's approach, in terms of interaction with non-Orthodox rabbis. Again, matters of community, the things that don't, hit at the real spiritual, core. We could deal with those issues. The others, probably not going to get us very far, and probably not going to promote unity. So this episode in Chumash informed Rabbi Soloveitchik, and Rabbi Soloveitchik, as a recognized leader of Orthodoxy in America, and as the chairman of the Halachic Commission of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the largest body of rabbis in this country really informed the multiple generations on where to set the boundaries and how we handle difficult situations. So from Yaakov and Esav, that some of those guidelines are actually still with us, very much so today. We have maybe a few minutes left. And so in those few minutes, you know what I think I'll do? If you have a chumash, let me elaborate on something that I mentioned before, which is a proof text to what I mentioned before. When Yaakov and Esav actually meet, so we're in chapter Lamed Gimel 33, and it is Pasuk. Yeah, so let's say Pasuk 15, Tet Vav. No, not that one. That pasuk is actually where, Esav offers to put some of his men to escort Yaakov, and there's no way that Yaakov, wanted that. It's actually a little bit later. So pasuk 8, Chet. So when Esav is right up close with Yaakov, he says, well, what was that whole camp that you sent me? Those people and all those animals that you sent, and I met them on the way. And who are they? What's it all about? By Yomer, he said, meaning Yaakov, just parenthetically, doesn't use very many names here in this story, which tells us that when names are used, we have to be careful about that, and that will come up here as well. So by Yomer, Limsochein Beinei Adoni, I sent those in order to find favor in my master's eyes. Meaning Yaakov's calling Esav his master. By Yomer Esav, now Esav, here's a name is used. Yesh li rav achi, I have a lot. Yehi lecha ashelach, keep what you have. I have a lot, keep what you have. But by Yomer Yaakov says, Al na'imna, don't push me off. If I found favor in your eyes, you should take this gift that I from my hand. Again, not necessarily the jewels, talking about everything. And why? Like seeing your face is like seeing the countenance of the divine, and I'm appreciative you're accepting me well. And he says, goes on to say in Yud Aleph 11, take my blessing and gift that I've brought to you. Ki Chanani Elokim, God has been gracious to me. V'chi yesh li chol, and I have everything. Vayikach, and he pushed a little bit further, or more than a little bit, and Esav took the things that he said he didn't want. What's the difference? The core difference between Esav and Yaakov as they view their possessions?
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
Because it says Yesh li Rav, I have a lot, Esav said. And then Yaakov said, Yesh li, what did he say? Yesh li Takol?
Yesh li kol.
Yesh li Kol. So when you have a lot, doesn't mean you have everything. But when you have it all, then you have it all.
Who do you think had more?
Well, materialistically, Esav could have had more. But also, but I think Esav also didn't want to accept because maybe he felt like, oh, you got my bracha, you think you have everything, but I have plenty. I don't need your stuff. So to say that he was going to accept it, it was more than just accepting my gift. It was also a sign that they were okay between each other and that the past was the past.
Can I ask a question?
But wait, I come
Could
back
I
in a
ask-
moment. I just want to, I want to respond to Barbara unless you want to respond to Barbara.
No, I will accede to you, Rabbi.
Okay. Um, the thing is, if Esau, the relationship, wasn't so, that's so great. Thank God there was no war. And Esau accepted the fact that the land of Canaan was going to be granted to Yaakov. And that's even why he was already on the move, knowing that Yaakov was coming, because he knew that he had his portion someplace else. But unfortunately, they didn't really resume having good brotherly relationships, and most of their life they didn't. They lived very different lives. But it's a nice message that you're suggesting. But I would still say that Esau's saying that he has a lot and he doesn't want to take Yaakov's was maybe a matter of positioning. As a lot of people in that region of the world, and we have other stories just with Abraham buying the Marat HaMachpelah, Ephraim he says he doesn't want any money, but then he takes like a huge amount of money, for it, not a token sum of money. So I think it might be more likely that Esau was posturing, and certainly in the conversation that I had with Nechama Leibowitz, was the position that she took, is that Esau, bragged that he had a lot of stuff, but he never had enough. Shlomo HaMelech says that, Ohev kesef lo tispa kesef. If you love money, you're never going to have enough money. And where Yaakov most likely had a lot less, even though it was, he had a lot, but he probably had a lot less than Esau had. But whatever he had, he was comfortable with. Ezuhu ha'ashir hasamech b'chelko. Who's the wealthy person? The one that's satisfied with what he or she has. Yes. So Cherno, you were waiting, and you're next in line.
My question is, are these sincere words, or are they? I mean, we already know that Yaakov was very fearful about meeting Esau. He didn't know what his reaction was going to be, and I would assume that maybe Esau was fearful too, not knowing how Yaakov would react. Are they just kind of dancing around each other without really being sincere in what they're saying, more of a fear of, well, if I say this, what's he going to say? And if I say that, what am I going to say?
Right. So there's not going to be a definitive answer to your question. The Chazal in the Medrash were already undecided about this. That when Yaakov and Esav embraced, so one school of thought holds that it was, a temporary reprieve, and at that moment, Esau felt true brotherly love, and and the other, was that Esau really wanted to harm, Yaakov at that time. So, it's not clearly known what it is, and on the other hand, or maybe that it's very important to know, is that it would seem that here Yaakov, let's put it this way, did Yaakov misread the situation? Because he's very scared before he meets Esau.
Yes.
And he takes multiple steps, and he winds up not being able to go to sleep. And when he thinks he set the camps up the right way, he has to move his family. He's not at rest, and he's really nervous about that. But in the morning, it seems like, wow, this whole thing fizzled out, and did Yaakov really have to worry at all? But a very major event took place between what I just said, between waking up in the morning and what I described, what happened at night. I left out the very main event at night, which was the wrestling match. And they wrestled for hours. Now here, if it was Esau wrestling with the angel, even though no human being should be able to overcome an angel, but Esau was most likely a muscle man. He was a warrior. He practiced his trade, all the time, in terms of his skills of hunting, and he's traveling around with 400 armed men. He was a man of force. Yaakov was this wholesome guy. wasn't trained in all of this. But the fact that Yaakov, despite an injury, the fact that Yaakov could win that wrestling match, in my opinion, gave Yaakov great confidence. It unlocked in him a potential that he had and didn't realize that he had. And that indeed is a role of an angel. When you think back to like Hagar, and the angel comes to Hagar, he gives her encouragement. In the episode where there's no water to give you Shmuel, and Hagar absents herself from her son, it turned out she didn't even look for the water. It doesn't say God created a well. It says God opened up her eyes. The angel was able to give her enough encouragement that she could look around to what resources were there to help solve this situation. So that is an important role of an angel. And we know that a malach, that's the phrase used to open up the Parsha, Vayishlach. And what does Yaakov send? He says malachim. So some hold that they were messengers, and some hold they were celestial messengers that really were, angels. But what we should learn is that we can be an angel. And Rashi says, like in next week's Parsha, not that we're so happy necessarily about what takes place, but when Yosef shows up in Shechem looking for his brothers, and this man finds him, and Yosef asks him, he tells him, I'm looking for my brothers, can you help me? And he says, that they traveled away, and they went to Dotan. But Rashi says that this man, he's identified as Ha'ish, the man. Why the man? Just he's a guy, he's a man, whatever. What's the? We never met him before. And Rashi says he was the angel Gabriel. The Chamalevowitz said in class that I was with her many years ago, says that anytime a human being comes to your rescue, and to Yosef, that he interpreted that as rescue. He wanted to find his brothers, even though it didn't work out so well. But when anybody comes to your rescue, that human being, flesh and blood, is like an angel. So
this entire portion, though, is filled with ambivalence and lack of clarity. It's lack of clarity for Rashi. It's the lack of clarity what happens, what he thought about over at night, what he did, who he wrestled with, how that worked. It was a lack of clarity when they went to give a kiss. I mean, that embrace. We don't have a clue what that actually meant. We have our best guesses, but this entire portion is filled with questions.
Right, but what even with that comment, that was Steve talking, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, so but even with that comment, I think the episode as recorded is telling us that Yaakov was a different person, and there was something in Yaakov that Esav could read, the body language, there was a certain, still within humility and whatever would be appropriate in such a situation, but there was something about Yaakov that was not the pushover guy that Esav might have known before. And and it seems you could understand the story that Yaakov was able to neutralize a situation which could have had a different ending. But because of the empowerment provided to Yosef in that wrestling match, and whatever appeasement worked, because we know appeasement does work, sometimes it's a mistake, but between Yaakov's inner strength and his showering of gifts of Esav talking to him in financial terms, and also acknowledging that if I did take anything from you through a bracha, here I'm paying it back, so so that you're not losing anything. And that's what Esav was more interested in. He wasn't interested in being the Kohen, in the Beit HaMikdash. He didn't want the spiritual part of it. So Yaakov was able to change the dynamics, but very possibly that there was like in the air, you had these mixed dynamics of what could have happened, what did happen was impacted by how Yaakov handled the situation. So it worked.
I have a question about the angel. If
Yes.
every angel has one job, right? And that's
Out of
so
time.
what was his job? I mean, he gave Yaakov a bracha, but what was that all about?
The bracha, he changed Yaakov's name and stuff,
Oh,
but that
that's true.
Hashem had to confirm. But that's what I'm saying, that the role of that malach was to allow Yaakov to see inner strength that he
I
had
see what you're saying.
to confront Esau. That was his mission for the night.
Okay.
And that even if you get, some injury, he didn't lose his life in the wrestling match. He came out with, an injured hip, whatever it was. But some injury, we could suffer, but we can win the big prize, the important prize.
Okay.
Thanks for
Angie, can
joining.
I ask-
Thank you
Thank
very
you, Rabbi.
much.
Rabbi.
Thank you.